This new year, why not let Audible expand your life by listening? Explore over 1 million audiobooks, podcasts, and exclusive Audible originals that'll inspire and motivate you. Tap into your well-being with advice and insight from leading professionals and experts on better health, relationships, career, finance, investing, and more. Maybe you want to kick a bad habit or start a good one. If you're interested in learning how to master your emotions and hearing scientifically backed advice for using your emotions as a tool, may I suggest Shift by psychologist and bestseller author Dr. Ethan Kross? Trust me, listening on Audible can help you reach the goals you set for yourself. Start listening today when you sign up for a free 30-day trial at audible.com/Wondery. That's audible.com/Wondery.
There's some incredible TV coming out of the UK right now. Brits just do it differently. The accents, the wit, the scenery, the devastating one-liners disguised as compliments. It's all streaming on BritBox. They have the best mysteries, dramas, comedies, and seriously addicting originals like Outrageous, based on the true story of the Mitford sisters. They were kind of like the Kardashians of the 1930s, wealthy, audacious, chaotic, wildly opinionated, and always making headlines. And chances are you've never heard their story. It's stunning. It's jaw-dropping. It's very British. So check out Outrageous. It could be your next favorite. Don't miss Outrageous, streaming now only on BritBox.
You know how we all have that one friend who's always investigating better ways to help you manage your finances? Well, meet Experian, your trusty BFF. And by that, I mean big financial friend. The Experian app is like having a BFF who's an expert financial profiler, ready to crack the case on your finances and help you take control like a pro. Count on Experian to help prevent your finances from reaching a gruesome outcome. This big financial friend can help you find ways to save, check your FICO score, match you with credit cards, and discover other brilliant solutions to sort out your financial mysteries. Bet your other BFFs can't do all that, And since this big financial friend is right on your phone, it's closer than any accomplice you'll ever have. Just download the Experian app and get started for free. Because honestly, the only mystery you should be solving is knowing where your finances are headed. Results will vary. Credit offers, approvals, and reward programs based on FICO Score 8 model and subject to lender terms. Offers not available in all states. See Experian.com for details.
And I was interested in factory workers. I know that brown women are held in less esteem than white. I know that the young are held in less esteem than the old. That, that poor, uneducated girls are pretty much near the bottom of the pile. So I decided that I've been tipping away at class politics for a long time. Maybe this is the way I can do it. I can go here and maybe tell this story and listen to the people. And that was the big thing. I had to go there and listen in Juárez. And, it was a time when you could have been afraid. It was nominated as the most dangerous city in the world in 2008. But I really didn't think so. For me, it didn't bother me.
That's Brian Macguire, a painter and an artist whose latest work has focused on missing and murdered Indigenous people in Montana. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. On a recent Friday in June, I drove through the Blackfeet Reservation in northwestern Montana, through the mountains on the way to Missoula. Earlier in the day, I started off in Whitefish, Montana, a resort town on the western side of Glacier National Park. On the Whitefish side, you can't throw a rock without hitting $1 million home. The Glacier Park, with its streams, rivers, expansive lakes, and views of the Rocky Mountain peaks, is beautiful. But if you take a drive to the east on U.S. Route 2, a different world emerges out of the mountains carved by the glaciers. The landscape is different as the mountains begin to merge with the foothills and the plains, but the communities could not be more different either. Instead of million-dollar homes, there are small shacks, houses, trailers, and apartment complexes. Because as you leave the park, you're leaving the land once owned by the Blackfeet Native tribe, and you're entering a land that they now hold. There's a mountain near the edge of the Blackfeet Reservation and Glacier National Park that's called Divide. It's most likely named that way for the continental divide that cuts through the Rocky Mountains. But it's also an excellent metaphor for the line between these two worlds that exist in Montana. After driving by the Trading Post in downtown Browning, visiting Browning High School and other places, I headed south for the nearly 250-mile drive to Missoula. I was there that Friday at the Missoula Art Museum to see an exhibit called Outrage, Missing and Murdered Indigenous People. Outrage had been created by an Irish visual artist named Brian Macguire, who created intimate portraits of missing and murdered Indigenous people. Brian was born to a father from Northern Ireland and a mother from the South, and he lived through the decades-long conflict in Northern Ireland known as the Troubles. At his exhibit, there were familiar faces to me, like Ashley Loring Heavyrunner, a 20-year-old woman who went missing on the Blackfeet Reservation in 2017, and Jermaine Charlo, a 35-year-old woman who disappeared in 2018 from the Badlander Bar only a few blocks away from the museum. But there are names that are not as commonly known, like Hannah Harris, Leo Wagner, Arden Pepion, and others. One set of paintings involves 3 family members, 24-year-old Preston Bell, who was killed by police officers, his sister, 22-year-old Tristan Gray, who was killed in a hit-and-run in Billings, Montana in 2018, and 16-year-old Selena Not Afraid, who went missing under suspicious circumstances and was found dead in 2020. It's striking that those deaths of young people all happened in just one family. A silent crisis is transpiring in the state of Montana and many other U.S. states, where thousands of Indigenous people are missing, and Brian truly captures it. In the same way I connected with the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous people through my experiences as a Black American and through conversations with friends, Brian grew up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles and was involved in the civil rights movement there at a time where people were regularly murdered or disappeared. In many ways, his work is an act of solidarity, one that Brian has repeated throughout his career. Whether it's stories like this or others who are marginalized, whether they're from women's shelters, prisons, or psychiatric institutions, Brian began this new project in 2020 with a Fulbright Scholar Award. From Indigenous communities in Montana to the areas surrounding Juárez, Mexico, Brian has told the stories of the missing, the murdered, and the marginalized through his art. For the known history of humanity, artists have been among our most important storytellers. Today, we're going to discuss the silent crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous people in the United States, what's caused Brian to gravitate toward this and similar artwork and storytelling, and what he hopes people can take away from art to better understand the world and those who are around them. So, Brian, I just wanted to thank you for coming on, and I wanted to just mention to you a little bit about how I found out about your work. One of my previous guests, Kimberly Loring, who's the big sister of Ashley,
Yeah.
Luring Heavy Runner. Yeah, we were talking earlier in the year about coming out and having me join a search for her sister. And she said, on this week, there's this art exhibit from this artist, Brian Macguire, and I was like, oh, tell me about him. And she said, oh, he's this Irish artist who decided to come and work on art related to our missing and our murdered relatives. And it just struck me in that moment. I thought, why would an Irish artist want to come all the way over to Montana and tell the story? And then I heard you were from Northern Ireland, and it started to make sense to me.
Yeah.
And because the Indigenous crisis in the United States is huge, but it reminds me of a lot of other peoples through different times in our
Yeah.
history, whether it's Black Americans or it's the Northern Irish or Palestinians who have gone through similar struggles. So I appreciate the fact that you did
Yeah.
do this work.
It's true. It comes from a ground of politics, and it comes from a contemporary world, and it comes from the history. Kimberly, I know well, she couldn't get to Browning when I was in a position to give her, because I made two paintings, one for the family, one for the exhibition. When I wanted to give the family portrait of Ashley to Kimberly, she couldn't go. She was in Portland. And but three of her relatives came, and we all met up in a woodwork shop of the college in Browning, the community college. Anyway, and the guy who was teaching there, Drew Landley. Drew, I decided to bite the bullet at the very beginning. This was the first time I'm handing over a portrait to a family or whatever. And I asked Drew, because what did he think of the situation where a white man was making these paintings? And what did he think of that? And he looked at me and said, well, for a start, you're not a white man. It's kind of music. But anyway, he then explained why he said that. He said, you're an Irishman. And then he said, he quoted the plantation of Ulster. Now, I don't know if he knew my name was Macguire, but Macguires were about the third family dispossessed in the plantation of Ulster. Now, when I talk about a family, these are...
And isn't the plantation of Ulster sort of the organized colonization of Ulster by the people from Great Britain?
So let's say the leadership of the clans, when I call them families, they're closer to tribes. The leadership of the clan were allowed leave, and they went to work for, the King of France or the King of Spain. But the ordinary Joes in the clan were sent up the top of the mountain. They were removed from good land, and and it was Scots soldiers who did this under English control. And the next thing that happens is that all the good land is divided up among the English officers. And that leaves the Scots soldiers kind of looking at each other, not able to feed their families. So they went over to America, where they got the same kind of work, scalping and killing and moving people off their land.
Mm.
And this man knew about that.
Wow.
He knew. Plantation of Ulster, well, it got one or two mentions in my home when I was growing up. It got a few mentions in school, but it was never much taken to discuss. I knew about it. I learned it in history. But in all my travels, I've been over most of the world, nobody ever mentioned it to me, except this time in Indian country, in Browning, in Montana, in the Blackfoot City. So they knew, he knew, that, well, there was a link between the Irish of the 1640s and the Indigenous Americans, if only that the people who drove them were the same.
Well, those Scottish settlers to the United States. One of the things. So my father grew up in a county in South Carolina called McCormick County. It was previously a part of a county known as Edgefield, and it was called Bloody Edgefield. And that is where the Scottish workers who had worked for the slave owners settled. And it, as you can imagine, just like the phrase bloody Scotland, it got the name Bloody Edgefield for all the violence that occurred there, both among the Scots themselves, but the Scots and the black slaves, and then eventually the free. It's interesting how all those things are interconnected.
I want to just, in the interest of accuracy, say that while I heard about Irishmen from the Montana Native Americans, they talked to me of their grandfathers who married into the tribes, etc., and that happened in the middle 1800s. And but those guys were okay. They weren't looking to kill or hurt anyone. They were just looking to get away from oppression, and that was explained to me by some women. At the same time, this is the area where Custer's people came to an end. There were many Irish amongst Custer's soldiers. Like the British government particularly made use of Irish people in their armies, and Welsh and Scotland. I mean, I would see little enough harm in the people who perpetrated massacres in India, etc. But I would see a lot of harm in their leadership.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel the same way. And I think that through history, oppressed people have been enlisted or even forced to oppress other people.
That's how it works. There's a very good joke I have to tell you about, which sums up the English colonization of the world, and it was of the world. There are two black African men standing at a pool in the middle of Africa, and they're looking in the pool, and there's two fish in the pool, and the fish are fighting. And one man says to the other, "What does this mean?" And the other one says, "What does it mean? It means the British were here before us."
That's a good one. That's a really good one. So, as I mentioned, I was sort of curious about what you did, why you decided to do this. And then I thought about the Irish fight for civil rights. And, I remember in the past that there were different groups like the Choctaw in Oklahoma who actually helped the Irish and sent food over.
I think it's very interesting. I think they sent, the lowest figure I heard for them was $300 at the time. Now, that was at the time that the Queen of England, in all her generosity, sent a £5 note.
Wow.
All right.
Wow. To help with the famine. Wow. Wow. That is wild.
And the Parliament, just so as to finish the argument, the Parliament debated the issue and said, this is a problem that the market must fix. There's the starvation and the destruction of half the people in Ireland. they said it was the market must do this. Now, where in your life have you heard that before? Any social issue that they come up with this nonsense that people are supposed to be able to buy their way out of trouble, you know?
And the reality is, like, I think to your point about the $300 at the Choctaws, and is it's really us choosing to help each other
Yeah,
that makes much more of a difference.
yeah.
One of the things I was thinking about was like the connection between art and storytelling. Like the most powerful artists to me, their work has an aesthetic beauty, but it also often is telling a big picture story. What kind of story were you trying to tell here?
Well, I mean, the principal story is that all these people are gone.
Mm.
You go walk into that gallery, it's a small room on the second floor of the gallery, and it's packed. The pictures are packed. They sit right beside each other, right around the room. It's a lot of people, you know. I mean, it's hard. It's only 30, you know.
It's a lot of people in a short time, too.
Yeah, you know. When you go into the room, it's overpowering the amount of people there. And then when you begin to read the stories of what happened to them or who they were, or mostly it's what happened to them, but some cases it's just who they were, and you know they're all gone. I mean, a number of people were left that exhibition in tears, and the tears were tears of shame because they didn't know.
Mm.
They hadn't known. Now, these are good people, you know. I mean that, but that's that was what I was looking for. It was that if you want to put a petrol bomb into this little boy's house and he burns him to death, you know, it shouldn't be done. It should not pass unnoticed. And I go back
Yeah.
to a story I told you earlier. I don't know if the newspapers eventually followed the killing of the 18-year-old girl, but the day after, it wasn't in the paper.
Really? Not at all.
No, because I was too shattered when it all happened that I don't have the training of a journalist. I didn't get her name or name of the family or anything. So I rang Brandon in the museum. I said, will you check out the papers and get us the name of that family that lost their daughter? And he said, there's no mention.
Wow.
Anyway.
And that's Jennifer that we were talking before we started recording about Jennifer and her family. And you had made a point about part of the reason why it was so hard, and the families were able to see the portraits before, were able to actually visit the gallery before the rest of us went in, and you also met with some of them. But you were telling me that story about the idea that every single time,
Yeah.
every single killing, where that takes people.
Yeah. When a young girl is taken and disappears, it resonates in the heart of Kimberly Loring and brings back the reality of Aisling, who was her sister that went missing. You know, it's logical if you think about it. You would expect it. Oh, of course, that's what happens. If you think about it, no, this is a continuing cauldron of, you know, of a kind of misery, and yet the march, the attendants were, in their own way, they weren't sad occasions.
Yeah, there was something beautiful about them, because I think about it, like you made a point to me that I hadn't really thought about, which was that every single time a person goes missing or is murdered as a part of the Native community in Montana, for every one of those families, it hits them.
Yeah,
And you had made the point that you had made a copy of portrait for the gallery and a portrait for the families. What was
yeah.
the experience of giving those to the families?
It varies somewhat. I told you the experience of handing over the three works to Jennifer was to enter into this more recent border. You know, I remember the portrait of Hannah Harris was, I remember we met the family in a courtyard of a social building in Lame Deer. And the young boy went, first of all, he said, Mama, when he opened the car door,
Mm.
back of the car. And then he wanted to know how it was done, and
How you were able to make this picture of mom?
yeah, with paint. And very, like he was just very involved in looking at that work. And, and he was the adult in the room, um, for that moment. All of them have been special. I did this work before in Juarez in Mexico. Same type of project. It's where I developed
Mm.
the ideas in it. And I remember bringing again the daughter of Jennifer, which was a largish painting, and showing it to her in the courtyard of a school at dusk. And she just stood there and started to cry, And I felt that she's, that you measure the aesthetic in this work by tears. There's no other way.
Mm. What happened? What was it that happened to Jennifer?
Jennifer worked in Jennifer Whitebeard. She worked it was a homestead hotel, very nice hotel, and we had met her there to hand over the pictures. And normally, at the handover of the pictures, towards the end, to kind of do something which is not all that wise to try and save money on the projects and get it done. You used to try and clear the texts on this visit rather than coming back for another one. So I asked her, could I clear the text with her? And she said no, that there's been a killing. A co-worker of hers went home with her husband, son, and found her 18-year-old daughter in the snow, dead, raped, murdered. And it had brought it all back to Jennifer.
Mm.
And she just couldn't cope. So we let it be, obviously. 18 years of age, Jesus Christ.
Mm.
Yet so many
Yeah.
of the kids were that age and younger.
18, 20, 21.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that, I think one of the things that art does, you know how they say that, one death is a tragedy, 500 is a statistic.
Yeah.
I think the art, and I felt this in looking at your portraits, brought the people to life. So for me, I started going through them. And,
Yeah.
I saw Ashley and I'm familiar with her story. And I saw the set of paintings with the three family members
Yeah.
who had been lost. Tristan Gray, who was killed in a hit and run, I think at 22. You had Selena Not Afraid, who was in the same family, who went missing under really suspicious circumstances at 16. And then Preston Bell, who was killed by police officers before Tristan went missing. I mean, was killed in the hit and run, and Selena went missing, and that just grabbed me. These three unconnected.
That's not it. There's one that's not there, which I felt should be there, but it's not for me to say. And that was Zoe. Zoe was a little kid. She was a twin of Selena. And when she was 11 years of age, there was some abuse taking place. I don't know the details of it, other than she wanted to get out of wherever she was, some situation she was in. And a little friend of hers had attempted suicide, and social services had come down really fast and removed her from this place she was in. Zoe thought she could get the same deal. But the thing was, she ended up hanging herself.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that was at the age of 11. It was judged a suicide, which,
Wow.
so, like I say.
So that's 4 in
4.
one family.
Yeah. And that's, some families are divided between, the effect of narcotics, because where poverty exists, the draw of a narcotic becomes much greater. And some families are divided with some of their kids and adults become users, and others don't. So the tragedies occur amongst the users.
Right. And in all sorts of ways. I mean, we focus sometimes on, I think, the people who go missing or murdered, but there are many more, I think, deaths or tragedies or jail or just addiction ruining someone's life that occurs. And it sort of speaks to the fact that it's all quite systemic. When you mentioned the little kid saying to you, wanting to know how you got that picture of mommy, how did you decide to paint the pictures in the style you chose?
Well, I suppose when I started working as an artist, anybody unfortunate enough to visit me was told to sit. I draw them. And, I then went to work. A big movement occurred in my life when I went to work in the prisons. I never had any convictions. We leave that where it is. But it meant I was able to go and work in prisons here in Ireland. The Arts Council asked me to go and work in the maximum security prison where the IRA were. And I often think about it, because the one thing you don't have when you're in prison, Irish prison, you don't have any vista. There's no long view. In fact, you're locked up in a limestone cell, which may not be as bad as a poured concrete cell, because at least there's the mark of somebody's chisel is in it. But anyhow, that's where you are. And I found that such men were bringing the idea of bringing paints and brushes and canvas and bringing the theory of painting, etc., into the prison. It was like bringing water to the Sahara, Huge take-up over the years. And the one thing I could do while I was in there was I could do portraits. And also, behind, lurking in the back of my mind, was the sense that if you paint a man's portrait in jail, you're really making a statement which is the opposite of the prison. And you're not doing it in a way that upsets anybody or undermines the authority of the governor or whatever. but you are actually making a statement, which is the opposite of what the statement the prison tries to oppose, because they remove men's names, they give them numbers, they control their relationships, they read their letters, all that type of stuff that goes on. Making a painting is the opposite of that. Also, making a painting was the simplest way to teach people how to make paintings. Not to copy me, but to follow the logic of color and how it moves around a face. So I don't know.
And it gives them humanity.
Well, yeah, it's in there. It's in there.
Yeah.
It's in every drawing a kid makes. It's there from the very. I never, I've worked in amongst Indigenous folk in places, which are almost untouched by the 20th century. They all know what a portrait is. you know, There's never had to explain it. You know.
Why did you decide on focusing on Indigenous people in Montana? What drew you to that?
Yeah, I was asked. I had done this job in Mexico because there, following Clinton's free trade agreement, the factories moved south and the workers moved to work in the factories. And there was enormous numbers of young, 16-year-old girls working in these factories. And I don't know how it started. I have suspicions, but they're not for radio. But anyhow, the fact is that the girls started turning up dead around the city, around the edges of the city. I read a book while I was in Idaho. I read a book by two Mexican journalists, women, about these killings. And what happened was, what it looked like to me was that every interest I had had in my life, because I worked in factories when I was young, and I was interested in factory workers. I know that brown women are held in less esteem than white. I know that the young are held in less esteem than the old. That poor, uneducated girls are pretty much near the bottom of the pile. So I decided that I said, I've been tipping away at class politics for a long time. Maybe this is the way I can do it. And go here and maybe tell this story and listen to the people. And that was the big thing. I had to go there and listen in Juarez. And, it was a time when you could have been afraid. It was nominated as the most dangerous city in the world in 2008. But I really didn't think so for me. It didn't bother me. I was delighted to meet the families if they accepted me, if they accepted the proposal that I would make an image of their daughter. I made a dozen images. And it took until 2019 for them to be exhibited, but they were exhibited in the museum in Juarez. And it was the first time mothers said that they had been invited into the center of the city and that their daughters had been honored. And they were very happy for it. What I'm really addressing is where you have an absent police of judges, of process, of prisons, etc., where all these things don't take place, and you have your daughter dead. And the state, which represents the community, doesn't bother to get involved or misrecords the result. Where one woman was found She was a hatchet girl nightclub. She was found with a bra around her neck, and the police said it was suicide. Like the police in Browning, the young man was shot in the back of the head and had his coat and other bedclothes thrown over him, and he said that was suicide too. I mean, the ability of the dead to rearrange the rooms and the clothes and everything. Fun. Anyway,
Very gifted.
it's satirical here. What I'm trying to say here is that by painting it, by making an image of it, by publishing it, by having it written in a book, it's some addressing of the failure of civil society to address this very public event of the killing of one's daughter. That makes sense to you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it's part of what motivates me to talk about these situations is because the normal apparatus that exists for suburban communities, wealthy communities, white communities, doesn't exist in these communities.
Yeah.
That I feel an obligation, even as an outsider, to give these people voice, to let them tell their stories. And that is, whether it's telling their stories through a picture or a painting or through a family member, that has value because each of them had meaning. Each of them had meaning. And when I visited your exhibit, one of the things, where I started crying was when I came around the corner from the paintings of Tristan, Selena, and Preston, and I turned around and I was confronted with the face of Leo Wagner.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, little Leo Wagner, he searched for Ashley. He was a family friend of Ashley Boring Heavy Runner and her family.
Yeah.
And he searched for her only to go missing on the same lake in Browning where we think Ashley disappeared.
Yeah.
And there was just something about the idea that this little boy who's trying to do good for his friend who went missing or for his family that went missing, only for him to go missing.
And I wasn't there back in those days. I came later. But I remember it was almost like cinema. There was a caravan of cars, pickups, a tiny caravan driving out of Browning. I think it was driving west. Just see that small caravan go to spend the weekend searching for it. This was his brother. Was going out.
Mm.
I remember that.
Looking for him at the lake.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about what the process is like. Do you just start with a picture or do you talk to the families or research the story?
You don't get to the picture till... And I never took the pictures from the internet. I got them from the families. And so they had to agree to meet me, to be involved. And at the beginning, it was hopeless. It was 5 months there, and I had only 4 people who were willing to be involved. And you've mentioned some of them. It was Leo Wagner's brother and Aisling and the little baby.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. She was a 3-year-old girl. It was Arden Papillon.
Arden Papillon, yeah. Anyway, they were the only ones. And I've been asking. And then in the last week, somehow or other, of the first trip, the one that was funded by Fulbright.
Fulbright.
Yeah, it was 5 months there. And the last week, somebody got to Shelley Finant and said, look, it's collapsing. There are people who have billboards up on the highway and he can't get to meet them. And indeed, and Shelley made four appointments, I think, for me. And at that stage, I had published, when I'd arrived, I had published the Mexican work. So I was able to put the Mexican work on the table and say, this is a portrait of a young woman who was killed in Juárez City. And this is her story beside it. And I said, this is what I'm proposing to do. And if you agree and assist me in it. The other four agreed. So in 1 week, I went from 4 in 4 months to 8. So I began, and then the next time, when I brought those 8 portraits back, or the four new ones back to Missoula and handed them out, somehow or other we managed to. Brandon organized. We got some support from the people who were.
Brandon was from the museum, right? He was the museum director.
Yeah, but he gave huge. He got huge support from some women he knew in the community, and they actually made the whole thing happen. And but I still had to individually go on my own to each family in a 2,500-mile run and ask their permission and ask, would they give me a photo? That's the pictures are kind of nice pictures, cheerful pictures, because these are the pictures families keep of their own.
The ones that... Yeah, I noticed that about Ashley's picture and Jermaine Charlot, that there were both pictures that I had heard were some of the favorites of their families.
Yeah. Well, that's how I got them. You know, they gave them to me.
What do you hope comes out of the exhibit? You know, you had mentioned the people. Yeah, you admit. Well, go ahead.
Many possibilities. One possibility is that somebody could take this random group of 30 people and start to analyze, you know, in a forensic way, how they came to be taken, how they came to be killed. And maybe out of that would come policy that might make it less likely that it would be repeated. So that's one thing. But that's a kind of that's like a political police community group that would do that. That's not an artistic job, but it's the job I would love to see come out of it. You know, because I believe a lot of these people could be still with us if some things had been done better.
So it's sort of for the people, like, in a way, and you make that point, but it's almost for the people in the future who you're hoping don't meet this fate.
I'm telling a story that is of interest to me, and why is it of interest to me? You know, I remember a girl being killed when I grew up, and it impacted on my mind. You know, maybe that's why I got involved. Maybe it's not. You know, I get to choose what I paint. That's the one freedom I have. And I was really happy that if I could make pictures that people were very pleased to have. Because paintings still they're like an honorable mention, you know. Do you know what I mean? Like you honor somebody by making their portrait. Now, I was a little bit anxious about coming in because I've read quite a bit into Indigenous culture, but it's not easy to actually understand it from what I read. And I discovered early on that, you know, Indigenous people, they honor their dead with images. But they don't like images made of the people who are alive, you know?
Yeah.
So I knew I was okay then when I had heard that, when I'd figured that out.
Right. Yeah. Well, I was curious, what about you? What was going on in Ireland and Northern Ireland when you were growing up, and how do you think that influenced your journey to the point that we're at right now?
Well, I know that one member of our family up there was shot in the back on his way back from a football game in the middle of the day,
Wow.
and that the soldier who did it, God knows where he was from, he was never really, it was covered up. You know, when we grew up, we were aware that these soldiers came over from England and were shooting people. And, it doesn't work. Anyway, some people were happy with this. Most people I knew were not happy with this. I remember being in college and there was a paratroop regiment came into a city, Belfast. It went out and killed 10 young men in a very short period of time. And I was a young fella in art school. What going to do about that? I made a painting of the back of a soldier. I put a sight on the back and I wrote the name of the young man they killed in Ballyfair. These things are being examined today in a very low level of excitement. Anyway, it's been looked at as legacy matter from the Troubles. My father would have had sympathy towards the IRA at the beginning of the fight. But the methods used by the IRA during that fight caused him to reverse completely. And he had no time for them at the end. I was different. I was kind of against them at the beginning because we had some belief in socialism was not going to be delivered by nationalism, which is probably still true or whatever. But then I went to work in the prison. And when I worked in the prison, I was confronted with the people who were running the campaign, carried it out, and I found them to be decent men. There was a logic to their beliefs, you know. So they are. I didn't make much work in relation to Ireland because I did in relation to myself, but not in relation to others. I didn't want to become that my work would become part of the condemning of some man for what he did. I did not want that. Also, because of such a small country, everybody knew everything. Everybody knows who did what, always. It's a different thing proving it. But, we generally knew. I just didn't want my work to be part of that. Things were so bad, there was no space. Around at the time of the hunger strikers and afterwards, there was no space in which to safely analyze what was happening.
Well, the difference I can think of in Juarez or among the indigenous communities in Montana is I'm not sure anybody knows what happened in a lot of those situations.
I know one thing for sure, I'm an outsider. And like when we were moving through these parts, and be it summer or winter, we were monitored. I remember cars coming up and saying, "Are you lost?" We weren't lost at all. We knew where we were. But anyway, people were watching us. People we didn't know and never will know. But that happened everywhere. And anyway, we didn't get into any trouble. We were outsiders. We were visiting bereaved families. we were said we would publicise the deaths of their kids. Nothing more.
What do you think you learned the most from your time in Montana?
How much I liked them.
I can relate to that.
Yeah, I like these people. These quiet people. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you as we're closing, I'm just thinking about the power of art and the power of telling people stories and thinking about the point that you were making before about even Juarez and that this was the first time they had been invited to the city center and the first time they had been acknowledged. And I think a lot of the families in Montana had a very similar reaction. Um, what are your sort of hopes and dreams for coming out of this kind of work for you?
I have the relationships that I built in making it a work. Now, normally those relationships remain for about 10 years. So Juarez one did, other ones in Brazil still do. And I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. If there's some people I've got quite close to in Idaho and in Montana, and they're from every political persuasion you could ask in the U.S. There was a march, began with a march from City Hall, I think, or either the courthouse or City Hall, I'm not sure which, all around. And the slogan was peace, no justice. And it was just discussing that they're very significant concepts about, because when the oppressor demands peace, it means that the poor should put down their guns and behave themselves. And therefore there's no need to give them justice. These are very interesting concepts. And I thought the Indigenous people who organised that march, they're the ones who boiled it down to 4 words. We used to spend that age arguing about peace and justice in Ireland. How could we have peace in Northern Ireland? Only if we had justice, and what would that be like, and so on. These guys had it down to 4 words. The whole dialectic of peace, no justice. No justice, no peace. So that was one thing. Then there was the families in public seminar spoke back to the artists in the group, because the way they organised it, there was Native American academic, an Irish critic who lives in America, myself with the panel, and in the room were the families. And we said our bit, and then they said their bit back to us, And I do remember one person noted that when she spoke back, she said, he went 2,500 miles around this state to visit us in our homes. That's all she said. But at that, she put her finger on how to do the project.
Right.
That was how to do the project. Just knock on the door. In other words, what's normal in human relations should be applied. Anyway, I don't know what else to say to you. It's a project.
Well, let me say something. I found it beautiful and powerful, and I don't know if you shed tears, but as I mentioned, I certainly did. And, I thought the same thing. This man traveled thousands of miles and then added thousands of more driving around this state to tell these stories. And that I think I've gathered from you that there is a theme here about justice, like that point that you made about peace. Like And that idea of like no justice, no peace is not only the idea that we can't have peace with others until there's justice, but we cannot have peace in ourselves. And maybe,
you've hit the point. That was what.
yeah. And I think for you, like by telling their stories, you're bringing a little of that justice.
Yeah, I think I don't know if that's the case, but the one thing is sure: I listened and I looked and tried to painted the picture, and then we did the show. And it's done now. Hopefully I get it. I mean, I would like to travel it. There's interest in Switzerland. There might be interest in Argentina. We'll travel it everywhere we can, for as long as people are interested in it, and then it'll come back.
I really believe that idea that there's no justice until there's justice for all of us.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining me and Brian for this conversation. If you'd like to join us for more discussions with me and other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For deeper conversations with our guests and live conversations with other listeners, you can also join us on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. I'm Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. We'll see you all again soon.
At Arizona State University, we've made online education better, smarter, and more personalized so you can go further in your aspiring field.
I decided to pursue medicine once I realized that ASU did have the online program for biological sciences. You're still required to learn the same curriculum. You're still being tested on the same content that anyone would be tested on in person. The comprehensiveness of the program prepared me so well for medical school.
Explore over 350 plus programs at asuonline.asu.edu.